Hey, how you doing? Let's do it to it. And I am back and ready to roll. Let's go for this thing. Okay. Oh, this is going to be fun. It's good to be back. Make sure I have the names right. Appreciate your patience on this. Alright, let's do it to it. Knight F3, D5, C4, C6. This is the ready, it's named after him. B3. Oops, 1 second. Hold on. Oops. Sorry about that. Clicked the wrong thing. Alekhine hasn't, Ready hasn't done anything wrong. Alekhine hasn't done anything wrong so far. They've all been playing good. So very solid. Knight BD2. So everything's all developed for both sides. E5. C takes D. C takes D. And then rook to C1. So now Ready's the first one to dominate the open file here. And so we have to consider that type of a setup. Okay, let me make sure I have the right straw. Perfect. Okay. Ready prepares for his favorable setup. The rook going to C2, making way for the queen and preparing to double. His queen to A1, creating a heavy. What he wants to do is play here. He wants to play here, slide the queen over, and double rooks there. That's what Ready wants to do. Creating heat along A1 to H8 diagonal. The strategy worked in Grunfeld because Black has an open file that allows the rooks to join directly into the center and assault the center. However, here that's not the case, and quiet play can easily lead to passive position for White, since Black can effortlessly strengthen his center, leaving White's army vainly basically just staring at a brick wall. So what will eventually happen is Black will be holding the position, maybe potentially moving this knight, and then playing f6 and just cementing the position and making a huge brick wall that he has to break down. Ready's setup is very picturesque, and one can understand his attention, basically his attention to detail to it. But Lasker shows that it just doesn't hold against his old favorite. Basically, this is his mentor mythological kind of setup. What he's trying to say is Alekine's Lasker's gonna prove that Reddy's opening just doesn't hold against a proper theory. Thus, White needs to add a bit of spice to the via well-timed e2 to e4, which is a strike. The question is, does this have to be employed now, or will it prove to be even better depending on what on Black's reply? Rook c1 has been basically marginalized by virtually every annotator. They inserted that e4 right away, not this move, but e4 was the way to go. Perhaps, but I'm not sold on the idea that Rook c1 is by itself bad. Before exploring the question of the worth of Rook to c1 on move 11, by continuing with the actual game, let's glance at e4 for a second. A move that declares immediately war on Black's center, Black's position. There's this position here, so d takes e, and then knight takes e4. And this is an exclam setup type of maneuver here. This is a really strong game. Strong. Bishop takes, and d takes e. Knight takes, and knight to h4. Knight d to f6, and now rook to e1. Knight, and what the idea is White wants to trade off the rook for 2 knights, which is actually really good in a middle game. And remember, the more pieces that come off the board, the weaker the e5 pawn becomes. It's just if it becomes isolated, of course. So knight takes here, king takes, and then queen b6. Rook f1, and then bishop b4. Gives Black more play than he deserves. Thus, the only way to handle this situation is actually to let me see here. Let's go back to rook e1. Queen e2 is actually an exclam setup, because what it does is it dissuades Black from taking. Is cleaner, and then knight to c5, knight f5 is pleasant for White, better than what he had before. Okay, in this line, if bishop e6 to try to hold the center together, e takes, bishop takes, knight to c4, queen b8, rook e1 to attack the pawn 3 times. It's defended 3 times. Rook e8, another defender comes, then rook c1, and this everything is now in optimum place. White has strong pressure in c5. Note the team effort. The bishop on b2, both knights, rook on e1, all take part in keeping Black in a defensive position. Okay, after this move, if bishop g4 to pin the knight to the queen, White can take, and then knight takes, h3, bishop h5, knight to c4 to basically triple up on the pawn. Yes, the right now only really only two are attacking it, because if this knight ever moves, the queen goes. I understand that. Queen f6. Now they bring another defender in. Now the queen's pinned to this pawn. Ouch. Queen e2. Now we're bringing three defenders in. Now we can actually, our four defenders, now we can actually potentially take knight takes, bishop takes, queen takes, and then if queen takes, knight takes. And we've actually won a pawn in this line. And as usual, black center is under fire. So if rook f to e1 or e8, then queen to e4, exclam here. What now you're doing is you're attacking the knight, and you've freed up this rook now to attack the, not rook, the knight on f3 to attack e5. g6 is a really nice for black. It's very hard for white to prove a significant advantage after this calm, logical move. d4, knight takes e, knight takes e4 or e5. Knight takes e5, d takes e5, bishop c5, queen e2, f5, e takes, knight takes, rook a, d1, knight f, king h8, exclam for black, and then knight to f3, knight e4. Black has a good active position. All right, I think there's another one. This is the last line, and then we go back to the game. E takes d. Wait a second. Hold on. Hold on. Okay, I got it. Trying to figure this out here. Let me see here. Okay, bishop g6. Okay, here we go. E takes d5. This is it. Had to figure this out for just a second. I appreciate your patience. Trying to grab the c4 square for the knight on d2. The goal has ever as ever basically, is to place more pressure on the center, and clearly a knight on c4 does that very well. So that's the whole idea about removing this, was to actually play knight c. Bishop takes, though. White is threatening to capture on e5. Knight c4 is in the air, and black's light squared bishop is a bit vulnerable on d3. Yeah, on the other hand, if black can protect e5 and get his f and e pawn marching up the board together, then he will be able to generate some serious dynamic potential for himself on that with that move. Rook e1, knight g4, exclam. Knight e4, bishop takes, rook takes, f5, rook e2, e4, knight d4, knight c5, rook c1, knight d3, knight e6, queen a5, bishop takes, g7, rook f8, bishop d4. I know what you're thinking, why not take here, right? My problem is taking, and then now you have this interesting continuation of here. Knight takes, and then this is just devastating. That's just total devastation. So that's why he just took with the queen. Queen h, queen d2, bishop e5, bishop takes, a4, f takes e4, rotate e4 with the attack on here, and then there. A wonderful play. Queen f5, rook takes, g4 check, queen takes g4, bishop takes. One would think that white stands much better here, but it turns out to be more illusionary than real because of rook e7, queen e3, rook e8, king g2, rook d5, queen f3, f4, queen takes, bishop takes, rook e2, rook c8, f7, rook c, rook e7, Rook c2, rook e6, and then h4, and rook c6. And it's an equal position. Surprisingly, this is equal. You think, wait a second, isn't he just down material? Well, not really, because you have actually for the rook. For the exchange, you have 2 pawns, and that's enough to hold a position. It seems that e4 doesn't offer white anything special. Rook c1 though retains the tension, so rook c1 retains the tension and keeps e4 e5 push in the ready for more basically opportune moment. Nevertheless, e4 is very important move for our theme. It's very important. In general, you don't want to wait around while your opponent's center grows more and more stable. You need to attack it with as much energy as possible. Queen e7. Rook c2, which is dubious. Remember we talked about this. He's trying to. Ready can't resist the siren's call of his favorable setup. However, e4 here now was incredibly strong. This was the time to pull the trigger, as we like to say. It has more power than it did on the 11th move, because rook c1 turns out to be far more useful move than queen to against queen to c e7. Here a quick e4 bishop g6, knight to h4, bishop h5, knight f5, queen e6, and then queen c2. And white is better here, stands much better. The rooks can't come over because queen takes would be set up for nothing less than a problem. So like if something right here happens, takes, you're thinking though, wait, can't the knight just interpose? Yeah, the knight could interpose, but wham, then the bishop falls off the board because the queen can't take. Then another piece would fall. This is just too much material that's been delivered to white. This is enough to win the game in just material alone. So you have to just be always on guard. a5. a4 is a mistake by Ready. White is craving his opponent, and he wants to stop. He's craving to stop the his opponent's initiative. Still, e4 in this position right here, e4 is still playable. It's interesting. It's not as strong as before, but it still is good. So h6. Let me see how we're doing here. Perfect. h6, queen a1. Rook f e8. Oh, not d8. That's funny. Rook f c1. White finally got his position he wanted, but so did black. Though white is hitting black's center from a distance and also controls the c file, all is not well in the town for Ready. His little his empire. His empire may look strong, but it's not altogether ready for the attack. The white is, let's see, okay. The problem is that his pawn strike against the center no longer works, and he can't set up pressure in any meaningful way. As for the c-file, all the infiltration squares are covered. This means that white has driven basically white down a street that he doesn't want to go. He's if you get into an alley and you can't, and your car can't back out, you're stuck. Kind of. This is the scenario that Reddy's in. His position looks good, but it's stuck. Rook, knight f1, knight c5, exclam. This is an interesting idea. When I first looked at it, it was really interesting. I was thinking, what is Alekhine's plan, basically? And his plan is to attack this pawn here, and then really mess up Reddy's setup. So rook takes c5 was an interesting continuation. It's a sacrifice. It's an exchange sack. White, who realized that he had been outplayed by Lasker and things have turned sour, employed an exchange sack in order to imbalance the position and give himself something to try to attack on. The defensive move, there's a defensive move, such as right back here, knight knight 3 d2 right here. Our queen to a4 would be met by by this move here, knight a6, followed by knight to b4. Either one of these moves, knight a6 to knight b4. Bishop takes, knight takes e5. White's gotten a pawn for the exchange. His dark square bishop is slicing down the newly open a1 to h8 diagonal. Black's once mighty center has been demolished. However, Black's position is solid. His pieces are well placed. Both rooks will continue to attack down the c and e file, and he's material ahead. Thus, white doesn't have full compensation for the exchange. A to c1. Bishop d6 forces white to lose the e-pawn with f4 was also good. So he potentially will lose one of his e-pawn, maybe, after taking queen takes, potentially. So like if takes here, there, and you could potentially try to take advantage here, like knight here. And the only way to hold would be that move, but then you've locked down the position, and potentially here, here, and in there could actually merge with an idea, and then black stands better at that point. Knight e3, queen e6. Defending d and stopping bishop to h3. Pawn h3. That stops the knight from infiltrating into g4. Because if you tried something else, we'll say Let me see. Let's try something like this. This actually is an interesting move right here, because if you try something like this, well, maybe it just loses a piece. It may just actually lose a piece, because you can, in theory, take here or take there. So that's interesting. H3. A serious mistake which suddenly gives white the upper hand. Oops. H3. Bishop to D6, which was a mistake by Lasker. Serious mistake which suddenly gives white the upper hand. Black has a series of good moves. Let me see here. Bishop takes E3. Rook takes C8. Rook takes C8. F takes. Rook C2. The threat is rook takes E2 and queen to B6, hitting both B3. So the idea is this here and then here, and that's hitting both this pawn. Oops, not that pawn. This pawn here and that. The rest of the game with minor black winning the game. The rest of the game with minor notes shows Reddy missing his chance and once again getting outplayed by his legendary opponent. Takes. Knight to F3, which is a mistake. Bishop B7. Knight D4. Queen D7. King H2. The idea is if knight takes, then the knight actually can take, so he can't really do that. So there. H5. Queen H1. H4. Knight takes. H takes. F takes. Knight takes. Bishop takes. Bishop F6. Bishop takes. B7. Rook C5. Bishop A6, which is a mistake. Bishop to E4 gives some drawing chances here. Queen B7. Let's see here. Bishop G6. Queen A4. Queen D8. B4. Rook C7. queen b6, rook d7, queen takes, rook takes, e, a takes, king g2, bishop takes d4, e takes d4, bishop to f, bishop b7, bishop b6, king f3, bishop b3, bishop c6, rook d6, bishop b5, rook f6, king e3, rook e6, king f4, rook e2, bishop c1, rook c2, bishop e3, and bishop to d5. And he basically resigned. Black resigned here. I mean, white resigned here. And so we'll summarize up what we've learned, and then I gotta say adieu here. Okay, summary. In the chapter that we went over, space is created by expanding. Actually, I appreciate your patience. Sorry, appreciate your patience. Space is created by the expansion of pawns. If you think of a line of pawns as a fence, you will easily understand the concept of territory behind your fence being yours. So the territory behind the fence of the pawns, like if you had pawns like here, we'll just say like that, all this land here is yours, all this land. And you think of it as a fence. This is all your land to work, and you're depriving your opponent of space. So that's kind of what they were talking about. An advantage in space is one of the most highly prized imbalances among modern grandmasters. A huge advantage in space takes away many enemy opportunities. In fact, if it isn't dealt with properly, the side with less space can easily end up with a passive and cheerless position, which means unfun. If you possess an advantage in space, don't forget about the other imbalances. For example, playing for superior minor pieces can be useful and complement with the territory gain. So if, let's say, you pacified your opponent and they can't do anything else anymore but just move back and forth, activate and make your pieces even better. It's usually a good idea for the side with more space to avoid unnecessary exchanges. This is number 6. In general, there are 4 ways to fight against an enemy's space advantage. Subsection 1 of 6. Exchange pieces so your limited territory is no longer uncomfortable. In subsection 2, use pawn breaks to open up or crack what seems to be an indestructible pawn fence. Subsection 3, try and prove that your opponent's gain of space has left weak squares in its wake. Subsection 4, treat a space-gaining enemy pawn center as targets. Okay, This is 7. Pawns protect squares. This seems obvious, but it's something that needs to be pondered and basically applied. Since many players forget about that a pawn advance, the potential forget about that as pawns advance, the potential amount of space they control diminishes. This means that as a player pushes his or her pawns and gains more and more space with them, he or she is also potentially leaving weak squares in their wake. So this is 8. Of course, pushing your pawns and creating squares that might prove weak later in the game is unavoidable. The key here is awareness. As long as you know the downside of every pawn advance, you'll be able to better judge whether or not such a square will really to be let me see such a judge whether or not such a square will be a problem as the game proceeds on. So if it will really be a problem as the game proceeds on. Okay, this is 9. Aside from trying to shatter the center and basically take the pawns, remember, one can also force the center to advance and make use of newly weakened squares these advances often create. So you may be able to get an outpost. 10. In general, you don't want to wait around while your opponent's center grows more and more stable. You need to attack it with as much energy as possible. Well, we got to see Reddy versus Alekhine, how Alekhine basically smothered Reddy. I mean, not smothered, but Reddy allowed Alekhine to set up an almost indestructible pawn center. And he ended up at the very end, because of his position, having to do an exchange sack, and it didn't even pan out the way it didn't even work out the way that he thought it was going to. When facing serious static disadvantages, you must demand counterplay by creating space in other sectors of the board, finding ways to make soothing exchanges which create more room on your side of the board, proving that your opponent's spatial gains have left serious weakness in its wake, or by using pawn breaks to open up lines and make your pieces the freedom to fight back. Actually, give your pieces the freedom to fight back. So open up lines to give your pieces the freedom to fight back. This is 10, 11, 12, 13. In a closed position, pawn breaks are necessary to open lines for an attack and to open files so that the rook can join in the action. So we'll read that one more time because this is vital. In a closed position, pawn breaks are necessary to open lines for attack and to open files so your rooks can join in the action. 13 is vital. 14, a closed position, the side with more pawn breaks is the side with the ability to call the shots. And this is, let's see, 14, 15. Cat and mouse is a strategy where your opponent is helpless. In such situations, the bearing of a forced win is often good to what to do in 20, what you could do in 2. In other words, take your time and let your opponent, and basically just bask in the that your opponent really can't do anything. I don't agree with that, but to some players their own. But I think what you should do is, if you can mate in 2 and then move on, just do that. So this is 15, 16. If your center is closed, play has to be found on the wings. In such positions, you usually play on the side where you have more space. Of course, there are exceptions. Don't treat any rule as, the golden rule, as we like to say. are the gospel. Once you determine which side that is, that you're playing on, which side that is, you will try and create weaknesses in the enemy camp. The pawn advance Use pawn advances to gain even more territory in your chosen sector of the board. And add pawn breaks to open up files for your rook so you can use them to infiltrate into your opponent's territory. And this is, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 17. In general, your space lies with your pawn chain. Oh, sorry. I have to repeat that. I appreciate your patience there. In general, your space lies where your pawn chain points. To add to your space and basically open up files in that area, you need to push the pawns that are next to your leading pawns. We looked at a game where that happened already. So let's see how many summaries we had. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. I think I miscalculated. There's only 16. So I'll have to, if you're here and you're listening to the recording right now, there's only 16, not 17. But what you have to remember is take what we've learned here, apply it, and your game will get much, much better. Also, go over the lessons that we have priorly done, like this here. Go over those lines, look at them, see them. Even if you have to start at the top and then work down again, do that. You'll get an improvement in your positions. You'll learn how the game progresses, and you'll actually be able to learn about mastering the imbalances. So just keep that up. Okay, I want to thank you for logging on, participating. Do you know what? You have to always remember that you know what? You got to take what you know and apply it and be willing to do something with it always. Don't forget to apply it. And sometimes, you know what? You can play like the AI computer and see how you do with those lines. But remember, always treasure your victories, but learn from your losses. Remember that mistakes do not define who you are. It's how you handle a mistake that defines who you are. That's a really hard concept. So, you know what? But you know what the Lord always says, that you know what? He's there when Jesus Christ is always there when we fall down. He's there to pick us up and help us to get even better. And that's why I pray that you receive the Lord Jesus as Lord and Savior of your life and dedicate your life to Him, because in the end, eternity is a very, very long time, my friends. And it's better to, be on the side with the Lord Jesus than not. It's not going to be easy, like even chess study isn't easy, but I got to say, in the end, it is worth it. Okay, we have to always remember what the Team Chess Cruncher motto is: hanging up your coats, hanging up your hats, sitting down and studying when most won't. Team Chess Cruncher does, and that makes all the difference. And as Wesley So says, serve the Lord Jesus, and as I say, God bless. And I'll see you next time on Chess Cruncher TV. Have a blessed morning, afternoon, and evening. Lord willing, I'll be back on tomorrow, and we'll keep pushing forward. Remember what Hannibal Smith said: even inside of a random position, there's always a plan. Trust me, my friends, there always is. And when you find it and you get to implement what we've learned and apply it to that random position and do good or not, but you learn from it, you get to say, I love it when a plan comes together. Okay, 2 thumbs up. Hoorah. Be blessed. I will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye. Go Team Chess Cruncher. Hoorah. Bye, Team Chess Cruncher.